It is 10 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have not met me before, my name is Erin Livingston. I'm a principal planner here at HGAC, and I am excited to be offering this webinar for you this morning. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be hearing about debris management in response to flooding. And before we get started, though, I did want to mention just a couple of things before I turn it over to the Tetra Tech team. So we will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar this morning, and at the end of each section, we do plan to ask your questions that you've posted so far. So as soon as you think of a question, go ahead and pop it in. If you want to say what section it's related to, go ahead and do that. And then we are expecting a good sized crowd, so we are going to keep everybody muted throughout this webinar this morning. And one final thing that I just want to mention is that we are going to have a after event survey. We're going to post that link in the chat at the end. And so we would appreciate it if you would stick around and fill that out. It's just a few questions and shouldn't take you too long. And we want to know how we did this morning and also what topics you're interested in hearing about at future events. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Nick now.
Hey, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm Brian Rutherford with Tetra Tech, and just to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about here, get my thing to move forward. There we go. So we're going to be talking about recent flooding incidents that have occurred. We actually selected this topic a few months ago, not knowing that the bottom was going to drop out in July. So we're going to talk about a lot of the things that have just occurred within the last month or so. We'll also talk about assessing the damage and what's included in that, and the importance of it, types of flooding debris, and what you should also be talking about considerations with flood debris, what you should be when you're looking at doing a flood debris operation, what are some things you should think about and plan for when doing that. Also looking at the environmental considerations, what are those environmental implications with floods? Then we'll be looking at the waterway debris removal programs. What are those programs that are in place to help you to remove debris and help you pay for those operations? And then not quite a debris operation, but we thought it was very important to mention, but is substantial damage estimates. So we'll talk about that as well. So to get started with the program, I'm going to hand it over to Nick Russo. Nick is the Director of Post-Disaster Environmental Services. So Nick, you want to
Yes,
kick it off
thank you,
with the
Brian.
flooding?
Let's go to the next slide. Welcome, everyone. Glad to be here today. I'll give you just a tidbit about my background. I've had a lot of experience recovering in several different communities from flood events, whether those were hurricane, storm surge, or more riverine and urban flooding situations. So just to elaborate on that, my first experience with a lot of widespread flooding was actually in the Houston region from the tax day flood in 2016. And so we had, a number of homes that were flooded in the county, and created an overwhelming, debris management situation during that time. So happy to be here. One thing I would encourage y'all to think about is, and Erin mentioned, put some questions in the chat when you think of them. Some of them we might stop and sort of have a discussion on with you. And before heading into additional, section parts of the presentation, I think we're going to stop and kind of look at some of those questions. I would also sort of encourage you, when you hear certain words or certain topics, kind of think about if you do have a role in debris management or flood recovery in your community, ask yourself, hey, does our contract, for debris removal cover these things, or is that in our scope? Do we have rates for that? And just make yourself some notes off to the side, and we can always follow up on those conversations with you. So let's get started. So obviously, Brian mentioned we have had quite a devastating series of flooding in Texas recently. Obviously, you have seen the news July 4th, and even the 5th in Central Texas caused a lot of rounds of flooding across the region, right? Several communities have been impacted severely. This one particular in the Kerrville region, and several of the unincorporated communities here in Hunt, Ingram, and Comfort, in the next county down. Just a tremendous amount of debris in the river, all of the search and rescue, and obviously our thoughts here are with those who have been impacted, as well as the number of volunteers and first responders that have come to the region to assist. So obviously a devastating situation and affecting multiple counties and cities. Next slide. And there have been, like I said, other communities impacted along the way, right? So in San Angelo, so a town, in West Texas, we don't hear a lot about, kind of surprising, large flood event, thousands of structures were impacted, and they're dealing with a similar situation of, dealing with the aftermath of debris and people mucking and gutting, their homes and their businesses from that event. Next slide. And one that's not really recent in this same time frame, but a good coastal example is Pinellas County, Florida. So Pinellas County was impacted both from Hurricane Helene and then Milton, and they had to deal with 41,000 homes that were affected in the community. So just thinking of that as an example, a coastal community, that's where you're going to see a lot more of the structural damage from storm surge and flooding, as well as vehicles and boats, and just an impressive variety of different types of debris from a situation like that. So definitely something that we want to keep in mind, that we have to deal with in our own region. We sort of have both, right? The coastal impacts from hurricanes that can hit us, as well as flooding from riverine and urban situations. Next slide. New Mexico as well, right? So July 8th, obviously everybody was kind of hearing on the news the Central Texas situation, but New Mexico had its own event. So a little bit smaller, right? But devastating to them nonetheless. So 200 homes damaged, structures that are impacted, and then Ruidoso has to kind of figure out, well, how are we going to handle the debris that's coming from those structures, as well as impacting their roadways and bridges as well. Next slide. And Kansas City, another one. So July 16th, 10 inches of rain in 12 hours. This one too is an example of, you see it on the news, but you don't hear as much about, the structures and residences affected. So in this example, it does play into the conversation about debris management, because sometimes we can have flooding, and it can be very severe, and it can cause a lot of recovery efforts for search and rescue and immediate needs, right? But at the same time, not all communities are affected in the same way. Not all residences might have been flooded and that sort of thing. So, sometimes looks bad, but then depending on the structures and the residential areas, maybe it's not a lot of, long-term damage. Next slide. So 2025 really set a new benchmark for flash flooding. Obviously, a lot of alerts and systems are in the news. Some communities, more advanced than others, but something that definitely we want to keep in mind. Next slide. So really, the topic, one of our main focuses here is, when does damage become extreme debris? And let's talk about that for a second. So when collectively here we think of Hurricane Harvey, what do you think of? We say hurricane, but you think of mass flooding, a lot of residential structures in the HGAC region that were, damaged just from the flooding, right? Not a wind event for us. And so we have that on our mind. And there are times when, the flood impact occurs, but the debris stream is not immediately known or immediately seen. So just to keep in mind, some of the flash flooding events that we just talked about, like Central Texas, did both, right? A lot of incredible search and rescue efforts, a lot of rapid debris that's present in the community just from, you see the homes that are swept away, the vehicles that are swept away. And so that immediately becomes a debris mission in itself, right? But sometimes in our urban areas, we may have these flood events and the debris is coming from maybe later on, sometimes a couple of days, sometimes could be a week. I think thinking back to Hurricane Harvey, it took about a week really for people to get back into their homes, begin to muck and gut, get all that flooded furniture, home items out into the curb, right, and sheetrock and carpet and all those things. So it really does take time before some of our communities may say, wow, this is an overwhelming debris for our community and our resources that are here, right? So not all debris from these events will overwhelm our local crews. One thing you could think about is who in your community would be responsible for, collecting or having to deal with that type of debris. Sometimes it's public works, solid waste, and just understanding what their capability is really important. And like I said, sometimes it can be weeks before the damage and the debris volumes are really realized. And that just, so we could spend time, running around looking at where things are flooded. Obviously, sometimes standing water may be present for a while. People can't get back into their homes. So that all impacts, what the debris volume coming to your right of way is going to be like. And the last thing, what's that?
Oh, hey, Nick.
Hey,
This is
John.
John Burry.
Yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. I was just gonna add a quick item, but go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and sometimes bad is really, really bad. And I want to emphasize that. So what we saw in Central Texas, definitely really, really bad, right? Hurricane Harvey flooding, really, really bad. Some events, it's just, you're going to have this rapid debris come out, be overwhelming, and you immediately know that, hey, this is a debris mission that overwhelms our community. We need all the resources that we can get to handle those debris streams. John, you wanna elaborate any here?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hello to everyone. First of all, John Burry with Tetra Tech, work with Nick and Brian here, and Nick, I think this right here of understanding the damage, you've got some great examples of the various types of flood, because water can and is so destructive. To put understand that in your planning assumptions, that it could be a micro a micro event, it could be a non-event, it could be something that is really, really, really bad. And to understand that. And then that second point I just want to hammer home is that with flood debris, it does take time to get out. It takes time to make sure that you have search and rescue operations if that need be. So those are really important factors to keep in mind. And I think that there was a question about the role that federal government plays. And so if you can hang on, we will be answering that question here throughout our presentation. So I'll turn it back over to you, Nick.
All right, thank you, John. Okay, so moving ahead, next slide, we're going to get into really how to assess that debris volume, right, and conducting damage assessments. Keep going. So damage assessments. A couple of things that we want to point out here is, the rapid assessment of how your community is doing. So a lot of times, getting information from your first responders, those on the ground, those people who may be involved in search and rescue or high water rescue, that's a good way to start to collect that information for, hey, where is our flooding occurring? Because there are situations that pop up where, like John was saying, is, how bad is bad? There are areas maybe that people can't get into, but just knowing and identifying those and looking at how can we come back, quickly. Where do we need to focus our assessments to look at those areas later? So that really helps with developing just, the common operational picture and what type of resources that may need to come into your community. The second part is, how fast can you do it? How fast can you get your staff, whether that's inspectors or construction management or public works type folks out into the field to just help to gather, high level windshield assessments. And that can be, I would like to say you can do it, simple ways. Hey, take addresses or subdivision type information, intersections, and just be able to collect where are some of our hotspot areas that need to be focused on. Same thing with debris, right? So counting, flooded homes to get an idea of maybe how many structures are impacted, where our debris streams are. That's really good information that you can use later. You could also do it, technology is your friend, right? So there's different apps that you could use, quick capture, some people using Esri products just to rapidly, capture pinpoints on where things are. So you could do it, like I said, in some old school manners, as well as applying a little technology to help you later on. And we also want to, emphasize what is the windshield assessment versus substantial damage. So in the windshield assessment portion, think about that as combining that with your life safety and welfare checks, or the people who are going out and just getting, rapid information about what's taking place in the community. And that's helpful to really begin to calculate damages, gather cost estimates, like we've said before, pushing that information up to the state of Texas, TDM, and then ultimately to FEMA to help get to, hopefully a disaster declaration to assist your community as well as the individuals and residential population that are there. Later on, we're also going to talk about the substantial damage part, which is really, collecting a lot more information and doing the substantial damages to certain homes as required. But in this phase, really, we're looking at how to just get information rapidly and understand what's going on and estimating, damage numbers and debris streams. So next slide. So here's an example. Obviously, this one happens to be from Hurricane Harvey. You see a truck working in the street here, and there is debris beyond you can see in the picture, right? Both sides of the street, this entire community was flooded. So we can get in here pretty rapidly. Obviously, you're seeing what's happened. We don't need to see that. Hey, there was water here before, because we're seeing all the evidence of everything that was in the house that's out in your right of way and needs to be managed. So that's another way of just calculating, gathering regional information from the community about and approximating, well, how many homes flooded here? 100, 150, just getting rapid information. Next slide. So the purpose of the damage assessment in this phase really is to help determine if a disaster declaration, can be approved. Like I said, pushing that information up to your regional partners at the state and federal government. It's needed to understand the scope and potential costs of response and recovery. Like I said, maybe at this point, your public works team is overwhelmed and couldn't manage all this debris and needs to activate your debris removal contractor to come in and help. So at this point, understanding what's the scope of that project going to look like? How many homes? What is that cost going to be? And as we've said before, debris removal operations are very, very costly to manage and dispose of all that debris. So it helps to really help you make decisions regarding the staffing, the equipment, and then contractor and resource support. Next slide. When we want to emphasize here, really, in these assessments, how does that play into the overall public assistance program and delivery process? So look at just the red stars. These are two areas where really damage assessments come into play. So like we said, your preliminary damage assessment and that pre-disaster declaration at the state and federal level really help, right? So we're gathering that information. And then later on, if we do have a federal declaration and FEMA comes in and has an applicant scoping meeting, then they're looking at gathering, what all are your damages to help, formulate project worksheets. And then, looking at the timelines for you to identify and report all of your infrastructure damage within 60 days of the recovery scoping meeting without, needing some sort of time extension to make that happen. So another point here is to think about, you are assessing your residential or your private residential impacts in the community, but also your own city or county facilities may be impacted as well. So that's another way of, another thing to look at is assessing what has the flood done to your facilities, and conducting the assessments and construction, remediation estimates for those as well. Next slide. So FEMA has a preliminary damage assessment guide. We've got a link to that in here, and it's really a good resource to help you look at how to collect this information. It was issued in July of this year, I think, so pretty recent. Next slide. So on these flood assessments, much of the focus is going to be on where was the high water, right? How far did it go? Assessments for flooding can require more time and resource, door-to-door type checks, but just keep in mind that, no time like the present, right? Get out there, identify the areas maybe that you need to come back to for a door-to-door check. Maybe there's still high water in those areas, and you can't get the field or your field personnel really into all the way into the community. So that it may take, a week or two before you have access to those, but knowing where they are is really important. Next slide. So how to document high water marks? Again, you can look back at the FEMA guidance for that, but going in, taking pictures of high water marks in various places of the house. Commonly, you're going to see that on the outside and the inside. Just high water lines, like in this picture, you can clearly see the mark, how high the water got in that house. And this really helps you to then calculate how many feet of water came into the house. You can have construction people estimate potential, damage and cost estimates from that, and apply that to your overall community, and get really good damage cost estimates that way. Next slide. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add here on as a best practice for the listeners and the participants on today's call is, this may require going on to a person's property, and without, a right of entry, if you will, or without, if you have contractors that are supporting you, or if it's staff, making sure you're highly visible, meaning you have the appropriate clothing that designates who you are, or in a county or city vehicle, something along those lines. There are a lot of, gawkers, spectators. There's a lot of fear of looting. And so if you are going to be looking at doing that, to develop a, depth damage grid or something along those lines, just to please make sure in your plans that you have an acknowledgement that you have a proper, not only proper PPE, personal protective equipment, but just making sure that they're properly badged and credentialed, and that there's no funny business, for lack of a better term right now, going on when you're collecting this data. Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah. Also letting the community know, the city or county are going to be out canvassing, looking at high water marks, or conducting inspections in the home. Some of that may be on an appointment basis as well. So
great idea.
Really
great
points.
Idea. The public
Really
information
there.
piece.
All right, next slide, Brian. So another example, documenting high water marks where you don't have, an actual structure to look at. So looking at, high water marks on trees, debris that's left behind, distances away from a channel, really helps. Next slide. And then, as I mentioned, also assessing, your own infrastructure. So roads in this situation, floodwaters can completely remove sections of the road, washing them out, washing away sometimes the whole bridge or the whole road, right? And really just damaging your underlying soil and layers beneath the pavement, which may cause foundation problems. So obviously in your community, you may have your public works team or your engineering department that's going to get out there and really needs to assess bridges and some of the roadway and culvert crossings. Next slide. Bridges, another example, right? So making sure that those are safe and secure, conducting, an engineering inspection of those prior to having a lot of traffic get back on them. So, oftentimes we'll see following a flood that roads and bridges in some areas may be closed for, an extended duration of time until until you can get some emergency repair crews, out to that location and makes, implement protective measures. Next slide. And we want to wrap up this particular part of the presentation with a good example, right? So this was South Texas flooding earlier this year in the April timeframe. And in these pictures, you see obviously high water across a lot of residential areas, right? Some of them, the roads completely underwater. So using this as an example, in this case, some aerial photography, drones were used really to get a bird's eye view, sort of take some estimates on, well, how many residential structures do we have in this area that might be impacted, right? Because getting into those areas when high water, you just, you don't want to get vehicles in there. Either they can't be in there or you're going to cause other damage with just driving around through flooded streets, right? So using the tools that, you have access to in your community to really help you understand, again, where are areas we need to focus on and make estimates on how many residents and residential structures are impacted. Next slide.
Nick,
yeah.
I on before we move to the types of flood debris, how critical it is, and how much pressure is going to be on you as the part of the debris team to come up with these estimates and be able to defend them and potentially revise them, because a lot of your planning assumptions during this debris estimating time and the damage assessment time are going to predicate the decisions and the activities that we're going to be talking about. So really having not only the manpower, okay, that's one side of it, that we've talked about having the technology and tools, whether it's drones or whether it's depth damage grid layers or whether it's your appraisal district maps, all those sorts of things. And then finally, it's that repository to make those decisions, to go up into the state of Texas PSTAT tool and ultimately be reported on, whether you're a city and going through the county up to the state. All those things are going to be really, really important, and in those early days, and obviously health and safety components, a big piece of that.
John, you mentioned the PSTAT, and the statewide tools for people to report, right? Keep in mind, and this is something, in real life that we see, you want to lean on that and say, hey, well, we have 100 residences that have reported damage in the PSTAT. But the reality is a lot of people don't want to report that, right? So you can't always in your community, rely on, hey, this is what's coming in as a self-reported, data. It's important to be able to kind of quickly validate that or match it up with what are your own local crews seeing out in the field in terms of where those flooded structures are and comparing that to what's actually being reported. So great point. I know before we move on, I think we said we're going to kind of monitor the chat. So,
okay.
Team, are y'all seeing some good questions that we should take a minute to answer so far?
Yeah, so we had just a couple for you. So let's see. Um, and this might be one that you wanted to answer later, but just let me know. But what part does the federal government play in debris and flood recovery?
Okay. Sure. The federal government as well as our state partners play an important part. Um, from a operational, actually, getting the debris, a very, very limited role. In certain situations. The damage may be so bad that there is a mission assignment provided to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to execute the debris mission that occurred in 2024 in the state of North Carolina, where, in areas like Asheville and other places in Western North Carolina, the federal government did execute the debris mission on behalf of some local governments who opted in. In some situations, the state may be involved. We've seen that in a number of different number of different places, and like what is going on right now in Kerrville, and in Kerr County, and the Central Texas floods, where the state, will be, moving in that direction. But a lot of times, the operational perspective, from an operational, like actually, when I say operations, I mean picking it up is going to be at a local level, at a city or county level. And the federal folks will be responsible if certain major disaster declarations are granted by the president, will reimburse the local government for their costs. And we will be touching that multiple times during the presentation. Is there anything else?
One more for you. What best practices have you seen in regards to communicating expectations of timing of debris operations to the impacted community?
Sure. Definitely, from a communications perspective, um, having being able to over communicate is a really, really important part. Making sure that and we'll go through that throughout the presentation, but making sure that there's coordination, communicating with volunteer groups, which are tremendously active after the event, on how to set out debris and the whole mucking and gutting. Communicating with your population, those that are impacted, making sure that you encourage them to put their debris on the right of way quickly so that crews can come by, because they are a public health and safety hazard. And then finally, communicating to your elected body, your elected officials, to not only show progress through various modes of that, but just communicating patience that this is a disaster. And resources are being brought in to remove the debris, showing progress, all of those sorts of things. So it's a multi-tiered approach: up, down, left, right, and making sure that resources are being dedicated.
And Danielle's question is great because she's an expert. We've had the pleasure of working together in this arena, right? So can't help but chuckle at the question. And I would elaborate that early in the early phases, you want to communicate high level information. Okay, it's not you're letting the community know about the potential schedule of debris collection and what's going to happen, using the HGAC materials and separation graphics, and even some of those public notices that are on the HGA website to help push that information out. As we've said before in other presentations, debris collection is not it doesn't follow a trash pickup schedule. So if you try to do that, that's where some of the challenges come in. But overall, just, sticking with high level, letting people know there might be multiple passes of debris collection in the area. And not to be overly concerned if a collection truck comes by and picks up certain types of debris but leaves others behind, because that's part of the program. So great question. What else do we have to answer before moving on?
These are a couple different ones that are related, but so what would you say the main factors causing these floods are in the year of 2025?
That's definitely a great question. Floods throughout the United States, happen very regularly, and I certainly am not one to speculate on this. I think we as Texans and we as those in the Houston-Galveston area need to be prepared. I mean, and recognize that this is a reality, whether it is moving water, rising water, or water coming at us from the Gulf, that that water is a destructive force, and that we need to be prepared for it. I mean, that's really a big reason why we propose doing this webinar and focusing on this topic, is because floods, I will tell you that next to wildfires, they are the most complicated debris program. It is the messiest, it is the most destructive to the lives of the disaster survivors.
All right, John, I think we've covered the questions in
Okay,
the chat so far, so you're
great.
welcome to take
Yeah,
us on to part 3.
sure. Yep, I'm going to be taking you a little bit of part of the way, at least. Let's move on to the types of flood debris and what do we really see as your major debris streams. And Nick, please feel free to hop in here. If you could go to the next slide, Brian. So vegetative debris, this is your woody debris. This is your tree debris, and that can vary. I would say that this more than anything can be a very, very light in the way of debris streams, because just because you have water doesn't mean it's going to come with wind. However, in the case of very, very swift water, you could see debris fields of trees that have been uprooted. I mean, trees where it's stripped their bark from them. So, I would say this is a medium. If I were to give it a high, a high, medium, low as far as what you can expect, this is not that big. It could not be that big of a debris stream. So, but again, there's a lot of information out there about collecting clean woody debris, and there's a lot of procedures out there for removing it and reducing it, and then ultimately getting it to its disposal operation. Next slide. C&D, or construction and demolition. Again, when I say messy, when I say complicated, this is what we mean. This is the everything. This is when people put their lives out on the street side. This is something that could encompass drywall. It could encompass your couches. It could encompass mattresses, or other pieces. This could be it. And making sure that you have a way to collect it, which is not easy. Talk to any debris management professional out there, and that it is very, very difficult to collect. And moreover, there's a ton of challenges when it comes to storing and finally disposing of this debris, because there's really only one place it's going to go, and that's a landfill. And so understanding how you're going to collect it, this I would give the high likelihood. So understanding how this is going to be collected is your number one, again, likely your number one challenge when it comes to a debris program. I mean, Nick, I know you've seen a lot of this, your time in the public sector. What challenges did you see when it came to construction and demolition
The
debris?
other word I would add to what you're saying is like nasty. It's just
Nasty
it's
smells.
gross.
Oh yeah.
And all the professionals that are involved, we always feel terrible for the residences that it came from, right? And in some cases, those people have been impacted time and time again, which is just makes it even worse, right? So, in Hurricane Harvey, I can attest to, knowing that, hey, this was a significant health and safety risk in the communities, even from homes that weren't flooded. Maybe they were a couple streets over, but just all of the mold and like I said, the nastiness, the varmints that come into play, you know, the mosquitoes that I think we're going to talk about, and just other rodents that carry disease. This is really where, you know, the public health, that you want the input from that public health and safety official uh, to help explain the severity and the health risks that are associated with this type of debris.
Thanks, Nick. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, when it comes to drilling down into this, this is what we're talking about. I mean, it's everything from roof shingles to furniture, fixtures, carpet, drywall, wood, treated wood. I mean, it is that disaster survivor's entire life. I mean, again, it could be up to 30, 35 cubic yards, which could fill up an entire truck. And we do see a lot of that when it comes to these types of officials. I've seen it, you know, following the 2016 floods in the state of Louisiana. Just a really, really big, nasty challenge. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, and a lot of it just is mixed. So, uh, Nick mentioned the HGAC flyer. There's a lot of different graphics out there, but being able to articulate this to your public, you know, to be able to set it out, keeping it away from some of the other debris streams, such as your vegetative and your household hazardous waste, is going to be critically important. Recycling, you know, we mentioned that here. Maybe there's some recycling professionals here on this. You know, quite frankly, outside of some of the other, you know, refrigerators or other white goods, which we're going to talk about, recycling is a huge challenge and often is not possible. So getting with your landfills, understanding that this could, you know, be going there either through a direct haul mission or through a debris site is something that is necessary to plan for. Next slide, please. Ah, white goods. This one definitely creeps up a lot more when there's extended power outages, or extended periods of time in that storm surge type of situation where a lot of the infrastructure is damaged and is completely or damaged or destroyed. This could come in the way of refrigerators, freezers, air conditioners, any of those things. You know, we do see from time to time that there are some industrious folks who will, you know, if it is a minor part of the debris stream, will pick these up and go to their, I mean, they'll just vanish overnight. But, you know, as you can see with the pictures here, and that's in Southeast Louisiana with in Hurricane Laura in 2020, where there's just a entire, it felt like a stadium parking lot full of the material. And so this one again has a opportunity to be varying, I guess is the best term, when it comes to this, because you could have a situation where there's evacuations, it becomes higher. When it's just a you know, a rising water event, you know, it is it's very dependent on the type of disaster. Next slide, please. Household hazardous waste. And, you know, this one, and Nick, I'd love to get your opinion on this one as well, is something that is really important and you need to have a plan for, is what I would say. Whether it is through a specific crew that's targeting this, or it's an event that you host and collect this material, there's going to be a lot of paint thinner, solvents, anything that's out in that garage or that had water in it, people are going to want to get rid of. While volume wise, it's not that big. It's not going to fill an entire truckload like, you know, you know, somebody's contents would, but certainly an order of importance, it's critical. Nick, I know you've had a lot of experience with this. What are some challenges or some best practices?
Yeah, thank you. As we mentioned earlier, like thinking about what type of scope and line items do you have in your debris removal contract? Sometimes HHW or hazardous waste are included in there. So one option is to go that route with a debris removal contractor. Another one, like John mentioned, is maybe you have a facility in your community that can be used, so you can direct HHW streams to that location, or do like a community-wide event. So a couple of different options. Really, I think the most challenging is to kind of do a door-to-door type collection and handle all that material properly. So one of the biggest focuses early on is, just trying to encourage the community. Hey, don't bring everything out. Like, keep that stuff isolated. Don't mix it in the debris stream with the other materials like the household items and the C&D. And try to keep it out of your right of way for the benefit of the health and safety of, not only children, but the overall community that's there. So.
Yeah. I mean, besides slowing down collection, you bring up a great point with your contract. One of the things you can do, whether you're doing it here on this webinar today, or you want to make a note and do it after, but check that contract to see what sort of line items you have for household hazardous wastes. And if you have one, and if not, looking at some options for either adding that to that contract vehicle or finding another outlet or another contract to achieve that. Thanks so much, Nick. Next slide, Brian. Yeah, again, really hammering on some of the other points here, keeping it separated from debris, having an HHW staging area. I mean, that's a great thing to talk to your contractor about, is what their experience is, what their plan is, their strategy. If they are going to stage it at the debris site, making sure that they have that separate area and they know how to do it. And then offering those other options like an event, like a one-time, hey, bring it today on a Saturday or a Sunday, having it staffed, and getting that word out into the community and giving them options for the HHW versus them finding an option, which is throwing in the rest of the debris pile. That's what you don't want. Next slide, please. E-waste or electronic waste. Again, something I would say is, volume wise, it's not going to be the volume that you see with your typical construction and demolition, but again, much like household hazardous waste, making sure you have line items in your contract, you have a plan for collecting the e-waste, and you have an end market to deliver it to, whether it's a CompuCycle, whether it is some other way to properly dispose, or another vendor that is out there within your community to be able to take these electronic e-waste. I mean, again, it could be a monitor, a CRT, something, cathode ray tube, something along those lines, a plasma screen TV. Those are all going to be something that will get damaged by floods and will come out, and having that plan for them. Next slide, please. Soil, mud, and sand. This is a tremendous challenge. I would give this a high debris potential when it comes to those swift water or storm surge type of events, and it is a huge challenge, not only from a federal eligibility perspective, but just understanding how you're going to address it. This may be in a community along the coast. It may be sand on the streets. It may be and where you want to take it, whether or not you want to put it back on the beach. It could be within a creek or somewhere along those lines where you're having maybe scouring and maybe built up and shoaling. But it's certainly something that is out there. And what I would recommend from a planning perspective is to identify who is that team, who is that person that is going to be addressing this. I know, Nick, you've got some experience, with your previous work in both the public and private sector with this, and understanding how challenging that can be from a funding perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I would mention is this is another one where I would check into your debris removal contract, right now, and see, do you have, not just soil, mud, and sand line items and scope, but also waterway debris. So if you have a lot of waterways in your community that you may need to, participate in removing debris, not all of these debris removal contracts have those line items. So look at, the rates or scope for vegetative debris from waterways, sand and silt, or whatever you want to refer to it as in the waterways, and then also like C&D removal from waterways, because those may be apparent too. So those are really big ones. Like I said, not everyone has waterway debris removal scope in their county or city contracts.
And due to the and this also, I'd give it the high impact for you as a planning group, or you're here thinking about a debris mission because of the cost. This can really be expensive. Anytime something touches water, which is how this is going to be generated, or it may be in the water, it's going to be expensive. And so making sure that, we've got contamination listed here, which may be a challenge, access agreements and rights of entry may be a challenge, just getting to the debris. Or, again, it may just be your end market. It could be, where are you going to take it? It sounds easy, but I've seen it a number of different times here in the Houston-Galveston region, as well as, in North Carolina most recently, making sure that you have a location to take this material once you have it collected. Next slide, Brian. Derelict vessels, vehicles. Okay, so anything that's titled, okay, certainly something we see come out quite often. This is something that you can drive, or is lived in, whether it's a mobile home, it's a boat. You can rest assured this is going to be a challenge. When we have a titled item, that means it is somebody's personal property, and there are certain rules, regulations, and processes that you must step through as you collect it. We oftentimes, and I also say that probably the big one, the elephant in the room, is insurance associated with this. So I've seen this most recently in the western part of the state of Florida, in Pasco County, just north of Tampa, where a lot of mobile home parks, a lot of issues came out of that, with people just leaving them, not coming back, and them just sitting there, and their total losses. So a big challenge there. Nick, I know you've had some challenges with this in the past. You want to mention anything about planning for this?
Yeah. Hey, Brian, go to the next slide, because we've got a lot of this on here.
Excellent.
One thing that we see is this becomes a sticky point for a lot of communities, right? I'll tell you, I think, as John mentioned, our friends in Florida deal with this a lot. Not so much in Texas, right? But really what we're talking about is this titled property that might end up or be in your right of ways, your roads, your streams, and on private property. And it came from somebody else. It's a boat or something that ended up on private property, and they don't own it. And so they're looking at you to, hey, how can we get rid of this thing? So there's a lot of that. The simplest ways I think we can tell you are the best practices to deal with it are to check your debris removal contract and see, do you have rates for, managing derelict vehicles and vessels, as well as managing a temporary site to basically store them on. Getting that titled vehicle or house, trailer from the right of way or private property, and that's a whole separate animal, right? We've talked about private property debris removal and rights of entries and all that, but getting those vehicles actually from where they are to a storage site is part one. Part two is working with your local officials to basically track and help reach out to the actual owners of this and sometimes insurance companies, but storing that and removing all the fluids from, the car, the boat, that sort of thing. That all has to be kind of handled separately, and basically keeping it there until these owners or insurance companies can come out and take back ownership or take responsibility for what's there. And then you get into some of the requirements for, well, what happens if no one does come, and what you can do as the ultimate entity here to either dispose or recycle those vehicles and vessels. So it does get complicated, but I can tell you, check your contract and just see what mechanisms are there, or look to having them included again for removal and then storage, and the fluids removal and disposal requirements too. So,
The one thing, Nick, great points, all of them. The one thing I will say, and I had recently, I've had the privilege of serving, nearly 100 or over 100 different communities in many disasters, and most recently in both Los Angeles following the wildfire there last year, or earlier this year, excuse me, and then in Asheville, Buncombe County. Is that sometimes you can't even see what kind of, or who owns the vehicle. The VIN number is destroyed, or it's so mangled and so impacted that you don't know where to go. You know it's a vehicle, it is a container, it has some sort of title associated with it. So it's a even greater challenge. So I think having that law enforcement component as a part of this team who deals with this type of issue quite often, you're just doing it on a grander scale potentially with this. All right, next slide, please. And next I want to move to animal carcasses. This is something that, again, we've seen big challenges in more rural areas where you do see more livestock impacted by rising water. I think of areas like Brazoria, or areas in Fort Bend County where this has occurred in the past. I think it's certainly a big challenge. Sometimes this is addressed by the actual property owners on their land. Sometimes it is just too great, too massive of an effort, and it may fall into your area. I would say this one is probably on the highly, or the unlikely side of your debris stream, but it does happen. It probably in 5-10% of these types of floods, and making sure that you do have, again, checking the contract, understanding that this is a potential for a debris stream that you may have to deal with, and that it is out there, and coordinating with the organizations like the state of Texas to get some more information, or any disaster specific information is important. Next slide, please. And here you can see the guidance document that we have posted there from TCEQ for animal carcasses. Nick, you want to
this one's really good,
here?
because I think in this case you definitely want to coordinate with TCEQ and just see what's allowed. So one example is we've talked about the wildfires that were in the Panhandle last year, and there was a tremendous amount of livestock death, right? And so TCEQ was instrumental, or had a big role in really telling those communities, well, what can you do? Bury some of the animals, getting them to landfills. We saw a lot of trucks carrying, unfortunately, a lot of dead cattle down the road and taking them to places. So it's always good to just coordinate with your local public health officials, as well as the TCEQ.
Thanks. Next slide, please. All right. So, we wanted to add a slide here about some of the specialized equipment that may be needed. We're going to be talking about waterway debris, in a little bit, but making sure that in some situations, that specialized equipment, like some of the amphibious excavators, or you may need to utilize barges within your community, coordinating with your debris removal provider, and making sure they have access to some of those assets, and understanding that some of this special equipment may be needed during the debris removal operation. Some great pictures here of those vehicles. Next slide, please. And you could, and certainly here with the use cases here, you have the waterway debris mission on the left, which has the we're picking up the debris in the waterway and then being loaded on a vehicle later. Just large quantities. I mean, this again, debris removal barges and boats that may be needed, especially when you have a storm surge type of event where the debris just may be inaccessible. So bringing that equipment in and on board, this is why we say floods are a challenge. This is why we say that the floods certainly are one of the most complicated of the debris missions. Next slide, please. Again, we wanted to highlight grapple trucks here. Those are those big, as one of the commissioners here in Harris County calls them, the Darth Vader trucks. Those are and again, when it comes to this debris, this is, if you are looking at renting this equipment, you're going to need to make sure you have, this type of equipment, which is really, really your best bet, your best option when dealing with this type of debris. Next slide, please. And then obviously a grinder here for those of you who aren't as familiar with these big tub grinders to handle large quantities of vegetative debris that may be generated. Next slide, Brian. And then your reduction options. Again, we talked grinding just a second ago. Air curtain incineration being another option. There's a lot of good information in previous HGAC presentations about reductions, and this being one to evaluate. And next slide. And then your reduction via compaction. This is the one when it comes to construction and demolition. If you do decide to open and operate a debris management site, it's going to be very important that you show some sort of reduction in the material, and to avoid, the stigma of double handling the material, but bringing, some very, very large, heavy equipment out there to reduce the material, which we generally see about 33% reduction that we do so, that you do so. Next slide, please. All right, so before we get into considerations with flood debris, we wanted to check again with the team and find out if there's any questions in the chat.
I'm not sure if you will be able to answer this one, but do you know if there are any future Army Corps of Engineer construction projects for the upper Texas coast to help with the flooding issues that they have?
Unfortunately, I cannot. A very, very great question, and one unfortunately I don't have the answer for there.
And then one more for you, asking about the pickup priority sequence.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, I see it. I see it right there. Pickup priority sequence: sanitary, white goods, hazardous waste, C&D, and landscaping vegetation. That I think that sanitary being kind of that construction demolition, especially for a flood, I'd say is number one, just because of what it can harbor and the mold and some of those challenges. Nick, I think that's a pretty good order of importance there when it comes to flood debris. Anything to add there?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the answer is it just depends, right? So some of these floods, like John said, you really may not have any vegetative debris. It's just all straight from the houses. So your sequence would be get all the C&D up. On the white goods, honestly, what we see pretty frequently is the longer they are out there, the better the chance they recycle themselves. Side note, and part of this is a joke, the ones that you'll really have to handle in terms of white goods and freon removal is the freezer that is full of either bait fish or wild game meat, because no one will want to take that one on your behalf.
Great point there. Certainly. And that leads us into considerations for flood debris. I think these are great questions here, and certainly some things that we can dive into. And so, Brian, you want to move into part 4? So again, we talked about this, the idea of the unique elements, and we got pluvial flooding. Again, this is where it, like a plume, it just overwhelms the surface water flooding. You've got that heavy rainfall. I mean, I'm thinking of a 2015 or 2016 type of floods that we saw here in the Houston-Galveston area, and even in areas like that received it in Harvey, where it just overwhelmed the stormwater system with rain. And then you have, of course, the next slide, Brian, that fluvial flooding, or the fast river flooding, when you certainly see the water level in those channels, these creeks, those rivers just move at a rapid speed. I mean, we saw it in 2016 in the Blanco River in Central Texas, and in the San Marcos area. We're seeing, obviously a definition of what we saw that July 4th in the Guadalupe River. So it certainly is a big challenge there. But we want to make that distinction. In the next slide, Brian, we have that coastal flooding. Again, it's that idea that when you do have a tropical event like a hurricane, that you have that in your plans, that we may, especially for those coastal communities, that you could be dealing with incredible amounts of storm surge. Next slide, please. So here's some more of the challenges in debris operations. Next slide. The search and rescue component, and again, I'm harkening back to this recent event with floods. That is certainly something that, from an operational perspective, you need to be aware of. Whether that is coordinating with the search and recovery teams, and groups that have the cadaver dogs, or in some of these other areas. Understanding and coordinating with your debris contractor, and putting processes and standard operating procedures in place for this challenge. So we certainly have seen that there's a lot of, there's some information out on the internet regarding this, but I definitely think you need to put this in your debris plan when it comes to loss of life, and if it does intersect with your debris management operations, that you have to have plans in place to stop work and to make sure that you you address that. Next slide, please. Access issues. Nick did a great job of describing some of the challenges with your roads and bridges. I mean, in certain situations, there are months where you may not be able to access certain areas. And from a debris management perspective, this can impact it in 2 ways: inaccessibility, which could impact your truck routes. And then just from a health and safety hazard, some roads may be down to 1-lane roads, or managed 1-lane roads, or there may be detours. So providing that information, I think, to your debris contractors, and understanding what routes to stay away from is a very, very important part of the overall operation. Next slide, please. Fuel availability. I think a lot of folks have maybe some standby contracts in place with some of the fuel vendors, but certainly in remote areas, or when there's power outages, making sure that these fuel trucks are staged and positioned. I mean, this is a great thing. We talk a lot about planning with your vendors, planning with your debris team, and this is a great topic. I will tell you, if you want an inject, you want something in your, which would be an inject in your tabletop exercise or your full scale exercise, This is a great one. I think understanding if your team is ready, and that's both your public sector and private sector team, to make sure that they have available fuel and that they have their plan in place, their continuity of operations, and who that is, and if they have backups, is a great thing to talk about and talk through with your planning team. Next slide, please. We obviously have the fuel availability being a potential issue with your standard assets and your underground storage tanks that may be in the area that are potentially contaminated. And you can see here the EPA guide, maybe a resource that you look to and find out more about this issue. Next slide. Displaced animals, and this from a health and safety hazard. Within our motto is keep our team safe, and health and safety of the individuals out in the field is of utmost importance. And we certainly see this a lot. And Nick, I know you have with both wind events and flood events, but you want to talk a little bit more about the displaced animals and some of the best practices to keeping your team safe.
Yeah, especially on displaced animals. I mean, reaching out to some of your local nonprofits or animal shelters. I mean, they really may need to get involved in dealing with displaced animals, especially if you have like shelter operations occurring, and then how to handle the animals that people may bring to shelters. But God, that's probably a whole topic in itself. Just
No.
I mean, yeah, just a lot of manpower and resources can go into that. So,
Thanks, Nick. Next slide, please. Oh, mosquitoes. I feel like that should be the official animal of the state of Texas is the mosquito, and it's certainly something that is a huge challenge from a debris operations perspective. I mean, you have to take that in consideration. I mean, in certain situations, this can completely disrupt a debris operation, just given the amount of mosquitoes that are out there. I'll never forget the flood, or sorry, Hurricane Dolly, which impacted South Texas in 2008, dumped tremendous amounts of water in that area, and the mosquitoes were overwhelming. And so, from um, a planning perspective, I think Nick mentioned getting your public health authority involved. I think that's a really important piece of this when it comes to flood, just because of the amount of standing water that occurs. I mean, Nick, you want to talk about some challenges and some best practices when
yeah,
dealing with our flying friends?
yeah, flying friends. I like those bugs a lot. Hey, Brian, go to the next slide. So, as John mentioned, the public health aspect. So, in Harvey and then other events, I think after that, you remember that keyword Zika, the Zika virus. And so mosquitoes aren't just a nuisance, but they carry they can carry a lot of serious diseases. So I can recall back to your mosquito your mosquito control professionals may get involved with the actual sampling and testing, and then the herbicide spraying. But the federal government may also come in and provide support for aerial spraying. I remember that from Harvey. There was a lot of planes, flying around and helping to reduce the mosquito population. So definitely a significant health risk, but can also be used, to justify the response and debris removal issues in your community. So thank you.
So no, that's a great thing. And so from a planning perspective, again, I'm thinking about your preseason meetings or meetings with your Office of Emergency Management, in looking and talking to them about, hey, if mosquitoes are overwhelming the community, I mean that's a community-wide issue, but what are your plans in place to address mosquitoes? Are I've seen some communities just go out and start their own massive spraying operations, and there have been some challenges when it comes to FEMA reimbursement. There are some methods and some strategies that you and processes that you must follow that are detailed in the FEMA Public Assistance Policy and Program Guide, or Papa G version 5, that just came out this January of 2025, that outline that. But moreover, this is a great tailgate talk when it comes to or a health and safety moment. When you are looking at that, we have a number of different tailgate talks that we go over with our team on a daily basis to make sure you have this and understand that this may be a big challenge in a flood event that could really impact and slow down negatively your debris operation. Next slide, please. And the hidden hazards. Again, we especially in those early days, this hazard has uh, definitely caused injury, caused death in some cases. There's so much energy and being anxious and being excited to go out to the community and show progress, but doing so in a safe manner. So again, we talk about tailgate talks, that when you are dealing with debris and standing flood waters, to make sure that your teams that are out there, your drivers, your operators, your supervisors, even when they're out there in those early days, that they are aware of the hidden hazards that could be out there in your debris, in your debris field. And then that's the hidden hazards also could go with that fluvial flooding when you have a massive debris field out there. That we've certainly seen that sharps. We've seen other types of um, hazards in those huge debris piles that are as big as a football field. And next slide, please. Contaminated water. And this is something, again, in those early days, to be aware of, to make sure that your teams are out there operating in a safe manner, that whether it's sewage, fuel, haz waste, medical waste, that could be in the water, and you want to keep those teams out of it. Making sure that there isn't any, reducing the amount of exposure. I mean, this is 101 when it comes to being in a safe and healthy environment. But when it comes to disasters, I'll admit it. I've probably been in some areas that I shouldn't have, and it's just the nature of whether you want to do a damage inspection, a disaster assessment, a debris estimate. You want to get in those areas, and doing so in a healthy manner is of critical importance. Next slide, please. All right, and then again, this goes with the search and rescue operations, and this is the human remains component of the debris operation. Again, when we've dealt with this in a number of different disasters, whether it's a wildfire, it's a flood, or we've actually dealt with it in a building collapse down in South Florida in Surfside. And I'm making sure that your teams are aware of this, because human remains could be in whole or in part, and in coordinating with the local authorities, and having a process for identification and notification, and understanding that debris removal may cease very quickly if human remains are found. And so again, I think this is in your daily debris meetings. If this is a threat to your flood debris operations, that having that plan that meets your needs and meets your community's needs is extremely important. Next slide, please. So I want to go back to recycling, and Nick, I want to get your perspective on this as well, because in floods, certainly I would say this more than a wind event where you're just dealing with a vegetative debris stream. Recycling is really, really challenging, and I think and I want to manage those expectations of the audience and understanding what you can and what you can't. I know you've dealt with a wide variety of these events. So what are your perspective, best practices, and what people can start planning for?
Yeah, thanks. In my experience, I know that there has been a lot of talk and research into recycling debris streams. As John mentioned, and you all know, reducing the vegetative debris typically by grinding often ends up as a mulch product and great for beneficial use. It's a little harder, I would say almost impossible, to recycle construction and demolition debris, the stuff that's come out of homes. That's just the reality. One of the things that I don't know if we exactly mentioned as a topic here, but a lot of times temporary debris sites are needed to just manage the C&D volume of material. A lot of those were used during Harvey. And basically all you can do with it is crush or, compact the construction and demolition debris to try to reduce the ultimate landfill disposal volume for various reasons. So, I mean, like I said, the white goods definitely, usually those all go to recycler, and metals as well. But, there's nothing really that I know of can be done with, flooded carpet or damaged drywall. And most people don't want to recycle or reuse like flooded, lumber and stuff from inside a house. But yep, that's about it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick. Next slide, please. All right, I'm gonna before we get into the environmental considerations, a quick check of the chat, and do we have any questions from the audience?
Right now, we have one. It may not be something that y'all can answer. I will read it out. Do neighboring states offer assistance to us, and what are they?
Okay, good question. That generally happens through an EMAC. I know there's a ton of acronyms in the disaster business, but the Emergency Management Assistance Compact it is available, and we certainly do see that. We have seen it from the state of Florida. State of Texas has provided that assistance, and it's been from everything from EOC, Emergency Operations Center coordination, and all the way to bringing assets and resources. So there is programs in place, and coordinating with the Texas Division of Emergency Management, or TDEM, is certainly an opportunity there. I will through the and then also, in addition to mutual aid from other states, there's certainly mutual aid from other communities that has been provided in the past with hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes, where cities will deploy resources and deploy equipment to aid, or potentially other state agencies like the Texas Department of Transportation. I know they have been supportive and supporting debris operations and bringing in some of their assets to aid in the collection.
And then one of the other questions that we have, and this is the last one for this section, is just asking about the available local resources right now in Kerrville and Kerr County, which I went ahead and answered that in the chat. So Kerr
Well,
County
great.
on their website has an update that they expect debris removal contracting to begin this week. And they have a debris removal questions answered right there on the front page for the county, if anybody needs to access that. But
Thank you so much.
that's all of them.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a great example of utilizing, websites and utilizing some resources out there, putting out frequently asked questions. If I could just give a really plug to that. We've seen a lot of communities like Buncombe County in North Carolina. That is where Asheville, it's the kind of epicenter of Hurricane Helene, which impacted that community in 2024. They put a great website in place. They did videos. They did all those things to give information to communities or to residents. Los Angeles County did a very, very similar thing. And we see it all over the place, standing up a website, using social media as a way to do that. So thank you so much, Amanda, for providing that. All right, and now we have, if there are no more questions, we can move on to part 5. Brian, are you,
Yeah, I can take it. So just talking about some of the environmental considerations with the flooding conditions. So, of course, we talked a little bit about water and the contamination that can take place from in a flood. And so you could have a wide range of different types of pollutants that could affect the water. And it can also affect the drinking water resources. So after a flood, you definitely need to maybe run tests on drinking water resources to make sure they're still safe. And a lot of times you end up having to issue boil water notices and those kind of things, particularly if there's been a reduction in the water pressure and those kind of things, or if you think that wells have been contaminated or other resources might have been exposed to the flood water.
Brian, that again, I'm going to talk about our Western North Carolina experience just because it's so fresh in my mind. And the water system there was impacted for a period of about 3 months, and debris removal operations professionals had to be prepared for that. So, I would definitely think, when it comes to that tabletop exercise, that if you want to include something that is an unknown, but it could be a known unknown, to have something in there about drinking water or hotel availability, some of those basic essential needs, including that in your debris tabletop exercise, and finding out how prepared are folks for it and what needs to be in place. What are we going to do to make sure that there is adequate water so that those professionals can be out there addressing those hazards within the community?
Yes, definitely an important thing to talk about. Who do you have to do those? Who would you call upon them? So making sure you have those resources at the ready is a good thing to have in your plan before something like this happens. All right, so habitat destruction. So they can also wreak havoc with natural habitats, so riverbanks, wetlands, coastal areas, animal nesting sites. So that's another thing to kind of watch for, and working with your environmental groups to, when you're doing the debris cleanup, look out for those kind of things that might have been disrupted as a result of flooding.
And Brian, FEMA has their green sheet when it comes to Section 106 and those endangered species that are within a community. So certainly coordinating with those professionals and knowing what is in your community, because habitat may have been disrupted, or you could be working in a habitat that has some sort of designation, and so there are a lot of resources out there for that.
So erosion and sedimentation. So the flooding can cause a lot of erosion. It can also chip away at roads and shorelines. And so you may have to pick up a lot of that sand and other debris that may impact waterways and also may impact water quality again, like we talked about earlier. So just one of those things, another thing to think about as far as what flooding and how it might impact the environmental areas in your communities. And then the infrastructure damage, the roads, the bridges, the buildings. We talked about earlier about checking the bridges and roads for possible damage, dealing with potential hazardous materials that may have been released as a result of the flood. So it's just make sure that these items are considered in your plan when you're working through these things, and you have people to work with you to help you work through those kind of problems. Testing may be needed to check for long-term contamination. So if you do have some heavy metals, some other chemicals or things that may have been released into the environment, doing some testing to make sure that the environment is safe for people to be in them and to work in them. So after the flooding has subsided, you might have to do some of those kind of tests and make sure that those areas are have been remediated.
Brian, this is definitely one I would recommend seeking guidance from our state partners in understanding, what may be needed, what types of testing you may wanting to look for, whether it is some of the heavy metals, some of other types of pollutants that are in there before acting. I mean, I certainly think that long-term contamination testing for your debris management sites is a best practice following their closure. But from a long-term perspective, getting that guidance before acting and understanding what hazards may exist and what to everything from what may be eligible for federal reimbursement or what may be just a need in your community is an important piece of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then debris jam. So yeah, you may have a log jam of debris that may actually result in more flooding or more issues. And so having an idea of what your choke points are and to clear the debris out of those so it doesn't cause more problems can be really crucial to recovery of the community. So making sure that just kind of keeping an eye on those areas, like you said, the choke points, so that you can get those cleared and get the water flowing out of those communities that have been affected.
And I'll tell you, Brian, that was something that, excuse me, was a huge issue following Hurricane Helene in Western Florida, because Hurricane Milton, and we went from H to M in a very, very short period of time. And those communities during that cone of uncertainty, as the hurricane headed that way, this was their number one priority, was debris jams and other areas that could have caused future flooding, greater flooding, and they threw every resource at them during those days leading up to the storm, because again, at some point you're going to have to hunker down, but making sure that where this is and having that situational awareness with your team, especially with the threat of a future, event, is a critical piece and a great example of the need for this.
Mm-hmm. And then asbestos. So particularly, if you have some houses that were damaged or you have to get into any kind of demolition work, the asbestos is certainly a risk, a hazard that need to be aware of. This is where you really need the experts to be able to spot where where it is and make sure that you have procedures in place for dealing with it. So structures built before 1980 are more likely to still have asbestos. It was pretty much outlawed after that, but it can still be found in attic and wall insulation, floor tiles, roofing, siding. I've been in some projects where we've had to remove the siding and everyone had to be suited up for that. If you're dealing with a automotive shop, it may have clutches and brakes, it may have that material in it. Coatings for pipes, and then heat resistant fabrics may also have some traces of asbestos in them. And so, has to be accurately identified. You want to make sure you have people who are qualified to do that kind of work, and also properly disposed of. So it has to be wrapped up and taken to a proper place for disposal. So you'll need to make sure you have qualified contractors for that work.
Hey, Brian, if I could add to this one. So we want to emphasize here for demolition activities. And this is another one, checking your contract. Some contracts have rates for private property, demolition of unsafe structures or even long-term, rebuilding and recovery programs. So when you do that demolition activity, the homes need to be surveyed for asbestos. And in your debris removal contract, you do want to make sure you have disposal items for asbestos removal and disposal. So whether that's outside of your debris removal contract, but in another contract, you're definitely gonna need those. So thanks, Brian.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. And then we get into waterway debris removal programs.
Brian, before we hop to that, a quick check of the chat. I see something popped up here. All right, let's see. Question about a major storm event. Some residents may need financial assistance of some kind. Who can they contact for such assistance? That's a great question. In Kirk County, or I'm gonna give you an example there, or in other communities, in a major disaster, there will be two programs or two designations, one for FEMA's public assistance program and one for FEMA's individual assistance program. And also there will be SBA, or the Small Business Administration. Those are resources that are designated and provided in big events like again, thinking about the Houston-Galveston area, the derecho, which was in April of May of last year, as well as Hurricane Beryl. FEMA will have disasterassistance.org that is a standing website, but it will be open for residents to apply and seek disaster assistance or other needs assistance. And they'll also set up disaster recovery centers, DRCs, which residents can actually go to and meet with professionals and representatives one-on-one. Oh, disasterassistance.gov. Thank you so much, Amanda. Sorry, I got that suffix wrong. I will tell you, I recently was on a disaster in Los Angeles following the wildfires there that burned over 10,000 different individual structures. And, I will say that the DRCs were a lifesaver for many, many survivors. In fact, I remember speaking to one individual, and she told me that she goes there every day. And so whether it's financial assistance or just to get information about recovery, I can't stress enough how important it is for those disaster survivors, whether it's financial assistance, mental health, or other resources, to engage and to go to those DRCs. They're quite frankly one of the most incredible things that happens, because it is a faceted. It's that one-stop shop for individuals, and to get the assistance they need. Great question.
All right, Brian. So we're on waterway debris, part 6. Go to the next slide. I'm going to kind of take us through waterway debris coordination kind of rapidly so that we have enough time to finish the substantial damage portion, because I know that's kind of a newer thing and we haven't talked about that in previous sessions. So if you guys don't mind, Brian, advance these slides a little bit at a time. So the NRCS is the main entity, along with FEMA, that you're going to want to talk to about waterway debris. And it's because the USD NRCS program has emergency watershed protection programs that provide funding for waterway debris removal. Typically what we see is, in the early stages of immediate debris removal and recovery needs in waterways, FEMA is probably the one there in the room working with you. And they will, in our experience, they will fund portions of that, but at some point they are looking to NRCS, at least for the applicant, to reach out to them and coordinate to see if there's funding available. So keep going. So in a lot of instances, you're dealing with a couple of agencies there, FEMA and the NRCS. I can think of programs in the HGAC region where NRCS is coming in later on, to provide debris removal grant funding. So it's definitely something that occurs. The other one, keep going, Brian, is the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA. So you could have hazardous material in the waterways, and EPA can be assigned a mission assignment to help take care of some of those hazardous items. The Coast Guard, excuse me, the Coast Guard as well. And the last one I would mention is the General Land Office. So there's a really good NOAA document. We'll send that out later if we don't have it in the presentation, but it kind of outlines the different roles and responsibilities for waterway debris removal programs, especially in coastal environments. So you may have, the GLO, who has some authority for removing debris in state-owned submerged land in coastal waters. And typically with the Army Corps of Engineers, they're going to play a role in federally maintained channels. But also, in our experience, FEMA will come to a meeting, and we've talked about some of those environmental considerations and the green sheet, and they will ask these questions like, are you working in a waterway is one of them, or a wetland, and what approvals do you have to do so? So just keep those things in mind, and having a way to reach out to those agencies for advice, especially in very fast moving situations, is key. Keep going, Brian. So again, we've got navigable waterways that come into play, and whether or not you have any maintenance authority or legal responsibility or ownership to remove debris from those waters. And then I think as well, we've got the non-navigable as well. So we've got a couple of different waterway types that may exist in your community. Maybe you are a drainage district authority or a flood control district, and you are responsible for, maintaining those waterways where no one else is. And clearly you have the responsibility then to, remove debris. Where it gets tricky is, or a little bit trickier, is in these situations where maybe it's a river and the maintenance authority isn't exactly clear, or, no maintenance authority exists. And so then unfortunately, we're there to navigate that responsibility and coordination, for lack of a better word, and determining, who's responsible or who can be a funding entity in that particular situation. So next slide. All right. Any questions maybe from the group on waterway debris before we sort of get into our last session? Or John, did you want to add something here?
Well, yeah, because you brought up some really, really good points, and I think that they all, as you were talking, I couldn't help but think this is not one of those things you want to run to your death on. Okay, when it comes to waterways, I know it's important. It could be obstructing, stormwater. It could be obstructing channels and create log jams, but I would say this one, really has to have I would almost call it a strike team, where you have that waterway strike team, and, in your plan and in your, operations, to understand, hey, we have our land-based debris after a flood, but in addition to that, there is this waterway piece that's hanging over us. And I mean, it could be, again, anytime I touch water, it's expensive, to make sure that you have those plans in place. And again, everything from, debris contracts to your legal authority, your maintenance responsibility, all those things are really, really a big piece of this. And so before I got into the SDE and the substantial damage component of this, I wanted to just uh, hammer home that. And it doesn't look like there are any questions. So moving into part 7, and you might be thinking, okay, last 15 minutes, what does SDEs have to do with anything? And really, we wanted to include this because of the importance of mitigation. And when it comes to flooding and mitigation, they go hand in hand. I mean, you all have seen the studies about 1 to 7, every dollar in mitigation saves $7, and quite frankly, I think it could be more in certain severe repetitive loss areas. But in your plan and in a long-term way to reduce your exposure to flooding events and debris that comes with water, especially that pluvial flooding, is to making sure you have a substantial damage estimate plan and a plan to execute this component of your floodplain ordinance in place. I mean, it has so many benefits. Not only your CRS or your community rating system, certification and ranking, but also FEMA this past year with the addition of category I is in igloo, has added this as a standalone reimbursable component of the FEMA Public Assistance Program. And so, we recognize its importance. And most recently, in Hurricanes Helene and Milton, a lot of communities across the state of Florida, North Carolina, where flooding was a tremendous impact, that they had a plan to not only estimate, the substantial damage, but substantial improvements on the other side. So we felt really drawn to this topic, just knowing, what's hot in the industry right now as that long-term aspect of debris operations and reducing your hazard footprint, or your hazard profile rather. So next slide, please. So what are we talking about? This is all part of NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, which offers insurance policies to individuals and the communities participating in this, adopting floodplain management plans and ultimately having a floodplain administrator. But just some basic information about what are we talking about, and this will become important because this is the carrot. Okay, this is the carrot from the federal government, which is participating in NFIP and your community rating system, and having a level 5 rating, or all the way down to a level 2 or 3, making sure you're reducing your flood risk. So next slide, please. With the National Flood Insurance Program, it's trying to reduce the risk in those special flood hazard areas or the floodplain, the SFHA being assessed before repairs are made. If you could go to the next slide, please. So in all practicality, this is the assessment for whether a property is substantially damaged, meaning it's the cost to restore and rebuild is greater than the 50% of its pre-storm, pre-disaster value. You can see here the SDE user manual and dated April 2013. This SDE tool, which is now on its 3rd iteration, is something you can download from FEMA's website. But this is a great document for you to familiarize yourself if you aren't as familiar with the substantial damage process. and it gives some ways to be able to meet or meet those expectations of what is in ultimately your floodplain ordinance and what would be acceptable when you have a community assistance visit or a CAV. Next slide, please. So really what we're talking about here is the disaster happens and an initial notification is sent out to those individuals that are potentially substantially damaged, and a property assessment were to occur. Now, a lot of times, and you can actually go on to a search engine, Safari, Google, one of the, Firefox, whatever you need, and you can certainly see several examples of what happens when a community doesn't execute this. There's some examples in Florida and some of the penalties and challenges that they faced. But being able to assess the property visually going out there and doing that curbside assessment, making sure that you understand where that high water mark was, and making sure that you have the community assessor's data to understand what the value of that property is and whether or not it is more than 50% damaged. And so ultimately that 4-step process being the disaster occurs, you send out the initial notifications. A lot of time that is in, direct mail to, potential, individuals, sending the property assessors out there. And again, some of you who have recent experience with disasters have had FEMA do this on a community's behalf. We've seen that decrease or end when it comes to new disasters, and again with the advent of the Category I for damage assessment and floodplain management activities being a reimbursable expense, FEMA is really promoting and providing funding for communities to do this. And again, once it comes to the assessors, which takes a lot of legwork, you have to evaluate that damage against what is out there. Next slide, please. Communicating results is often that most difficult step, because essentially you are telling an individual that they cannot rebuild without a substantial improvement, which would be bringing their property up to current existing code, which may require an elevation of their home. That is a big challenge. And again, a lot of those articles that I mentioned out in the on the internet are around that communication, and ultimately making sure that people understand, hey, how did you get to that number? We've seen communities institute appeals process, and again, that kind of gets into steps 5 and 6, because at the end of the day, you want the community to rebuild, but you want to do it in a safe manner. And so again, what we're talking about here is not only getting the data, but enforcing the data as well. And that can often be a bigger challenge for communities. And listen, we've seen it result in about 10 to 20% of the homes, those that are, I've heard the term used, hopelessly deep in the floodplain, and ultimately that will lead you as a community to evaluate mitigation options that could lead to things like a buyout program or a home elevation program or other infrastructure programs to help those communities. So while unpleasant and while oftentimes politically unfavorable or unsatisfying, if you will, it is something that is important for you to know that it is a requirement to be in that floodplain, and execute this program. Otherwise, there are consequences. Next slide. And again, it gets to that final piece of once a determination is made, whether a community, an individual comes and proves that, hey, you know, I've got the receipts here, I've got the construction estimates, and I'm not this is not a substantial improvement to rebuild, or it is, and that property recovery begins and permits are drawn and that home is either rebuilt or elevated or some sort of mitigation takes place. The property inspection occurs, and really you're back to a more resilient community in a you know, and mitigating those flood hazards in the future. Brian? Yeah, there's a lot of information out there in you know, if you want to fact check me, if you want to get more information out there, FEMA has provided a lot of information. You have Section 1206 of the Disaster Recovery and Reform Act that was passed in 2018, which really provided the mechanism for funding this program. You can see it here. I mean, again, there's a ton of information out there on substantial damage estimating, substantial improvements. I mean, this is being talked about nationwide as a risk reduction method that is now out there that the federal government is providing funding to in certain situations, you know, after major disaster declarations. Next slide. Well, with that, I wanted to give everybody a big thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Brian, for as well as Amanda, Wendy, Aaron, the entire HGAC team for everything that you have done and being a part of today's presentation. Are there any questions? And then we have the post-event survey. If you wouldn't mind, before you take off, to please provide the information. And if there's any additional information that you all need, please reach out through HGAC, and we want to make sure that we can get that over to you.
And oh, looks like there's a question, so I won't say my spiel, John.
Oh.
It says, during a storm major event, some people are assisting with rescuing people and animals. Is this encouraged?
Yeah, great question. You know, we certainly see that coordination, whether they are self-motivated, self-deployed volunteers, or coordinated through um, agencies like the Baptist Men's or Encore or a number of different you know, organizations. We certainly see that. I mean, encouraged um, is a strong word. I don't know how. I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone, but we certainly see it a lot, especially in those early days after a disaster. And quite frankly, I mean, you know, from my perspective, having been a part of a lot of these disasters, it has certainly been something that I would encourage when it comes to long-term debris recovery emissions. I do feel as though there's a tremendous benefit, but there also comes with it some risk. And I know HGAC has provided some tools, information about how to coordinate with those volunteer organizations. You can find it on their website, a tremendous amount of resources. You can find that, and perhaps that will help you in your journey with coordinating with these volunteer groups. Thank you for the question.
All right. Doesn't look like there's any other questions, just some great information comments. So I do want to echo
you.
what John said. Thank you so much to everybody that attended, the great questions you've asked during the webinar, and also to the Tetra Tech team for a lot of great information for all of us. So we have posted that survey link like John mentioned, so please do take that survey. It's only a few questions, and it helps us to provide you with the type of information you want to learn about in the future, as well as improve our webinars. So I've also posted a link to where you can find past events. We have the recording from the July 7th event, as well as other past events. And this one will be posted there within a week or two. So watch out for that if you want to pass it along to any of your colleagues that weren't able to attend today. And that's all I have. So I just want to thank everybody again and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day.